This Indonesian official buried the people's money in the barren sand, convinced that the traces of his sins would remain hidden forever. But the land never forgets. When the sand began to whisper, dragging his house away, then slowly swallowing his body and soul, Kuncoro Wibowo finally realized what he had buried was not just money, but himself. Now in every gust of wind from the arid land, the screams of those he could never repay echo endlessly. In the small town of Sinduwinangun, the name Kuncoro Wibowo echoed like a whisper of kindness. He was known as an official who never missed charity events, distributing food packages, building village roads, and shaking hands with hopeful mothers who gazed at him with admiration. On local television, Kuncoro's face always appeared with a bright smile, clad in a crisp white shirt and the slogan, "For the people, by the people." Yet behind that broad grin festered a rotten secret. In the silence of his office, beneath shelves lined with meaningless accolades, Kuncoro signed fictitious documents, slashed social aid funds, and funneled them into shadow accounts. Each stack of money flowed smoothly, feeding the stagnant pond of his false honor, drowning what little remained of his decaying conscience. That night, behind the fogged windows of his office, Kuncoro stood gazing at the empty streets. A light drizzle fell, as if even the sky was ashamed of the corruption creeping within that grand building. Sipping his bitter coffee, he whispered softly, "The people only see what I show them, the rest I'll bury deep, somewhere beyond in the barren, windswept outskirts of Sinduwinangun. A quiet place waited, a place that, unbeknownst to him, would not just hide his dirty money, but would one day swallow him whole." Under a starless night. On a pitch-black, starless night, Kuncoro Wibowo drove his luxury car alone. In the back seat, 3 large suitcases stuffed with embezzled social aid cash sat heavily, each one reeking of old paper and suffocating guilt. His destination was an empty plot on the outskirts of Sinduwinangun Tanah Garing, as the locals called it. A stretch of ashen-gray sand, parched and whispering strange secrets whenever the wind blew. No one dared build there. Rumor had it the land was where the rotten promises of the colonial era had been, buried long ago. Kuncoro ignored the old warnings. To him this was the perfect place, far from human eyes, far from the law. With hands trembling from greed, he began to dig, first with a small shovel, then with his bare hands, clawing at sand that felt unnaturally heavy. It was cold, damp, and smelled like something rotting silently beneath the earth. He shoved the money-filled suitcases into the hole. As he covered them with sand, he heard something. A sound, faint, almost imperceptible, like the whisper of 100 tiny tongues. "What you bury will bury you." Kuncoro froze. His eyes darted around, nothing. Just the wind, just shadows shifting in the sand. He shook his head, cursed under his breath, and resumed shoveling harder, laughing at his own fear. But deep below the ground something began to stir, something that would one day come to collect the debt of what Kuncoro had buried that night. Several days had passed since Kuncoro Wibowo buried the embezzled aid money in Tanah Garing. Life carried on as if nothing had happened. He attended new building inaugurations, gave fiery speeches about social justice, and flashed his trademark honeyed smile on television. Yet beneath the glittering facade, the first cracks began to form. On the 5th night after the burial, Kuncoro woke gasping for air. His body was ice cold, his face drenched in sweat. In his dream, he'd stood alone in a desert of black sand. Beneath his feet, the ground churned like a festering sea. Then, skeletal hands shot up from the depths, clawing at his ankles, dragging him slowly into a whirlpool of stinking, iron-tinged sand. He tumbled from his bed, his knees slamming against the expensive marble floor. As he scrambled up, his eyes caught something at the far end of the room, a trail of damp sand, leading from the door to his bedside. The sand was real. The metallic stench clogged his nostrils. Panicked, Kuncoro sprinted to switch on every light in the house. But when he returned to his bedroom, the trail had vanished. Only the dry, spotless floor remained, mocking his sanity. That night, for the first time, Kuncoro understood. What he'd buried refused to stay buried. Something was rising, slow and deliberate, tracing the footsteps of his sins, ready to collect its due. Kuncoro's days turned into a silent hell. Each morning he found sand clinging to his shoes, staining the marble floors of his living room, even dusting his dining table. The sand was unnaturally fine, damp, and carried a foul odor. a nauseating blend of metallic blood and ancient decay. At first he blamed the housemaids, accusing them of carelessness. But after replacing all his staff and hiring professional cleaners, the sand kept appearing, every morning, every night, always more than before, as if the granules were slowly colonizing his home, building nests in every quiet corner. One evening, during a meeting with his cronies in the grand parlor, Kunkoro froze mid-sentence. Amid the hollow laughter and empty chatter, his peripheral vision caught a damp trickle of sand seeping from between the sofa cushions, slowly forming the shape of a small hand. His fingers trembled around his glass. His pupils dilated, but when he turned to look properly, the mark had vanished. Kunkoro forced a laugh, downed his whiskey in one burning gulp, mocking his own paranoia. Yet in the secret chambers of his heart he knew the betrayed earth was now staking its claim in the waking world, and he could only wait to see when the sand would hunger for more than just his polished floors. 1 week after the sand first appeared, Kunkoro's mansion began exhaling a putrid stench. Not ordinary decay. This odor stabbed deep into the lungs. The reek of rotting flesh mingled with wet clay. Kunkoro summoned plumbers, architects, even a spirit medium hunting the source. They all offered technical explanations. Leaking pipes, aging drainage. But when they broke through the foundation, they uncovered the inexplicable. Beneath Kunkoro's house gaped a cavernous hollow filled with dark grayish-black sand. The sand moved, pulsing slowly as if breathing. The workmen recoiled in panic. The spirit medium, a grim-eyed old man, muttered just one phrase before fleeing. "This soil has fed on rotten promises. Now it hungers." Kunkoro denied everything. He ordered the pit filled, the foundation repaired, the incident erased. Yet that night, as he sat alone in his parlor, the floor beneath him groaned. Not the creak of settling wood nor the wind's whisper, but the sound of countless small mouths, whimpering with hunger. Kunkoro finally understood. It wasn't his house that was crumbling. He was the one slowly being swallowed whole. That night, heavy rain poured over Sinduinangun. Lightning split the sky, and the rumble of thunder rattled the windows of Kunkoro's house. Inside his lavish bedroom, Kunkoro jolted awake from sleep. A strange sound had disturbed him. The sound of scraping, coming from downstairs. His heart pounding, he grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs. When the beam of light swept across the living room, Kunkoro froze. The entire floor had transformed into a shifting expanse of wet sand. The expensive tables, the French-carved chairs, all tilted, half submerged in black muddy sand. From the center of the sand, large bubbles rose and burst, releasing a pungent, metallic stench that made Kunkoro gag. He stumbled back, gasping, his eyes darting wildly for an escape. But as he turned, he saw something that turned his blood to ice. Tiny handprints, thousands of them emerging from the sand, as if grasping, dragging down anything that stood upon it. Suddenly, the sand pulsed violently, and part of the floor collapsed, forming a gaping hole like the maw of a beast. From within, whispers rose, 1,000 voices merging into one. "Return what you buried, or be buried yourself." Kunkoro screamed, hurled the flashlight, and bolted for the door. But the sand slithered after him, alive, devouring carpets, tables, even the walls. This was no longer a home. It had become a ravenous creature, and its prey was its own master. Kunkoro staggered down the long hallway of his house, which now trembled like the belly of a living creature. Each step felt heavier, as if invisible little hands were dragging him down. The once sturdy walls cracked, oozing sand from every crevice as though leaking the curse he had awakened. When he tried to open the front door, its hinges rusted instantly, locking tight. From beneath the door, black sand gushed like a flood. There was no escape. Kunkoro turned, his body now coated in wet sand that clung like leeches. He raced up the stairs to the second floor, hoping to leap from the balcony to freedom. But with every step, the wooden stairs softened, turning to quicksand, sinking his feet ankle-deep. Amid the howling rain and the churning sand, Kunkoro heard something. A child's laughter, faint, eerie giggles mixed with hungry whimpers. "Give it back. Give it back." Just as Kunkoro neared the second floor, a sand-formed hand shot up from the stairs, seizing his ankle with terrifying strength. He crashed onto the steps, his flashlight shattering as it fell. In the darkness, Kunkoro thrashed, kicking, clawing, desperately trying to break free from the living sand that pulled him deeper. His screams echoed into nothingness. No one heard, no one cared. That night his house was no longer a home. That night it was the grave digesting its master alive. Konkoro managed to crawl to the second floor, only to find a far more terrifying scene. Foul-smelling sand dripped from the ceiling in every corner, piling on the floor into vague shapes. Faceless children, their bodies half-transparent, formed only of sand and rotting mist. They stood in a silent circle around Konkoro, judging. His body trembled. Cold sweat mixed with mud trickled down his temples. Mind-fracturing from terror, he scrambled backward until his spine hit the wall. One of the sand figures stepped forward. From its shuddering form came a whisper that pierced bone deep. "You sowed hunger. Now you shall roast in thirst." Suddenly the sand on the floor began to boil, releasing scalding steam reeking of decay. Konkoro's tongue turned to dust. He screamed for help, but only a choked rasp escaped, as if sand had already filled his throat. From above, the dripping sand thickened, slowly burying his hair, eyes, and mouth. He flailed, but every movement only drew more sand, heavier, suffocating. The sand children closed in, their arms stretching toward him. Not to strike, not to strangle, but to push more, slowly, relentlessly forcing him backward, into the swirling vortex of living sand now gaping open in the floor. Konkoro screamed with all his might. But nothing answered. Nothing stopped this. The trial had begun, and the sentence was a slow burial, fully conscious in the cursed sands of his own sins. Konkoro's body was now half submerged in the swirling sandpit, its slow, deliberate rotation savoring every second of his torment. The sand was cold on the surface yet burned from within, seeping under his skin, into his flesh down to the bone. With trembling hands, Konkoro clawed at anything. A table leg, the doorframe. Even shadows, he prayed, might save him. But everything dissolved at his touch, crumbling into slick black grains that slithered through his fingers. The faceless sand children kept watching, their eyeless gaze silent yet heavy with judgment. Where they stepped, glowing footprints seared into the floor, forming invisible words that stabbed at his soul. And what was buried wasn't just treasure, but hope, life, souls. Konkoro screamed, he begged. He wept like a child offering wealth, power, even his own spirit. But in this realm, rot could not be bargained with. The sand rose to his chest. His breaths turned shallow, ragged, eyes bulging in terror. He felt the grain smothering his face, filling his mouth, his lungs. In his final gasp, Konkoro heard, not laughter, not weeping, but uttered children's prayers, the very prayers he'd ignored when his people starved by his hand. God, take him, as he took from us. Then silence. The sand closed over him. The house stood still. The earth settled. Yet beneath that cursed sand, in the limbo between living and dead, Konkoro's soul writhed, trapped in the grave he himself had dug. The next morning, Sinduinangun was in an uproar. The grand mansion of Konkoro Wibowo, once standing proud as a palace, had vanished. In its place lay only a stretch of damp gray sand, reeking of foul decay. No debris, no remnants of the structure, as if the earth had swallowed the house whole overnight. Villagers gathered at the edges of the site, murmuring protective prayers. Some threw salt or planted bamboo poles, fearing the curse might seep up from below. Local authorities were baffled. Police arrived, cordoning off the area with yellow tape, but there was nothing to investigate. Theories spread, local landslide, minor earthquake, sabotage, yet deep down everyone knew. This was no natural disaster. This was retribution. An old woman, her voice hoarse, stood at the edge and whispered, "And the land has only taken back what was stolen from the people's bellies." Those living nearby swore they heard strange sounds from the sand each night. Whispers, weeping, and prayers carried on the wind. No one dared approach. The land became forbidden, a place spoken of in hushed tones, where a traitor of the people was buried in the weight of his own sins. It didn't take long for Konkoro, Wibowo's name, to begin vanishing from the world. In government offices, the plaques once adorned with his honorary titles were replaced without ceremony. In city archives, records about him disappeared somehow, like papers fading and being erased by invisible hands. Local media stopped mentioning him. The townspeople seemed struck by collective amnesia. Younger generations only knew of him through whispered stories. There was once an official who buried the people's aid packages, and then was buried alive by the earth himself. Yet no one dared speak Kunkuro's name aloud. Some said that whoever uttered his name, near Tanagaring would hear whispers in the night. Wet, gurgling whispers as if from a mouthful of sand. Give it back. Give it back. Meanwhile, deep within that foul sand vortex, in the space between worlds and death, Kunkuro's soul remained trapped, screaming, begging, weeping, but never heard. He had become part of that land, an eternal piece of corruption, haunting the place where he had planted greed and reaped a curse.